It happened on my 67th birthday. I was standing behind a cake I didn't want, in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by people I didn't know. And then Lana looked me straight in the eye and said that if it were up to her, I'd die alone and forgotten. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Surely no one would say something so cruel on a day meant to celebrate life. But the smirk on her face told me I'd heard her right, and the silence in the room confirmed it. My son Ethan didn't say a word. He just stared at his shoes like they might offer him some kind of escape. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending they hadn't heard, others suddenly very interested in their champagne. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from something deeper. Something old. Something that had been quietly smoldering inside me for months, maybe longer. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and looked right back at Lana. "You have 10 minutes to leave my house." Her expression didn't change. Not at first. She thought I was bluffing, that I was too fragile or too polite to cause a scene. But I wasn't bluffing, and I had nothing left to lose. The room didn't erupt. No one rushed to my defense. The silence just stretched thinner, tighter, like a string about to snap. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain myself to anyone. I just waited. 8 minutes later, Lana was the one crying, begging, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I didn't waver. Because that day, I finally saw everything clearly. Not just Lana, but the cracks in my family, the weight of my silence, and the quiet strength I'd forgotten I still had. What happened on my birthday didn't break me. It woke me up. And it set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Something that would change the way my family saw me. Something that would reveal truths I wish I'd never had to face. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not being alone. Not to be forgotten. And certainly not of a woman who thought she could erase me from my own story. That day was the end of something. But more importantly, it was the beginning. Losing James was like losing gravity. 1 minute, I was tethered to something solid. Next, I was floating through a world that no longer made sense. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful, hollow, the kind of quiet that echoes inside your chest and reminds you just how loud love used to be. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. I hadn't washed it. Couldn't. It felt like erasing proof that he was once here, drinking his morning roast while teasing me about crossword puzzles. The bed was too big. His side stayed untouched. I'd reach out sometimes in the middle of the night, forgetting, only to feel the cold space beside me like a fresh wound. Some days, I couldn't bring myself to open the curtains. Other days, I'd sit by the window for hours, staring at nothing, hoping the sky might offer something I'd lost. Ethan visited more often after the funeral. He brought groceries and flowers, always checking if I'd eaten. His kindness was steady, familiar. But even then, it felt like he was tiptoeing around the edges of my grief, afraid he might fall into it too. He brought Lana over a few weeks later. She was polite, smiled a lot, too much. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, but held just enough warmth to mask its chill. She told me how sorry she was, how hard it must be to adjust. Then came the suggestions: grief groups, online therapy, a pamphlet about a senior living community that she casually left on my table like a forgotten magazine. She meant well, at first, or maybe she just played it that way. Her concern slowly turned into gentle criticisms, comments about how quiet the house was, how dusty the shelves seemed, how isolated I'd become. She'd ask questions that sounded like care but landed like accusations. Are you eating enough? Are you safe here alone? Do you ever think about moving somewhere more, age appropriate? It was subtle, always wrapped in a tone of concern. But each remark left a mark, like a paper cut. I couldn't explain. Ethan didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. He was grieving too, in his own way, and Lana made things easy. She cooked, she organized, she took charge of things before I could even speak. It was like watching someone rearrange a home that wasn't theirs. Bit by bit, she moved into the space James left behind. But she didn't fill it with love. She filled it with control, dressed in kindness. And I let her, because for a while, it felt easier than fighting, until the day I realized she wasn't trying to help me heal. She was trying to decide what kind of life I was allowed to have now that James was gone. When I stepped through my front door, the smell of expensive catering hit me before the sound of laughter did. Lana was standing in the living room, orchestrating everything like she owned the place, her arms waving as she directed the florist to adjust centerpieces that didn't belong on my table. The house looked beautiful, in a cold and unfamiliar way. It wasn't how James and I would have celebrated. Too polished, too impersonal. Like someone had staged it for a magazine instead of a memory. Lana saw me and smiled widely, but her eyes didn't soften. "There you are," she said, then added that I should change out of my dress because it looked so somber. I glanced down at the navy blue fabric, one James used to love on me, and felt something twist in my stomach. I walked slowly through the rooms, trying to find comfort in the walls I'd lived in for decades, but it was like walking through someone else's party. Every conversation paused when I got near, then shifted gears before I could join in. I heard my name more than once, always in the past tense. Stories about my grief, my routines, my supposed isolation, as if I were a subject of discussion, not a person standing 3 feet away. The guests were mostly Lana's friends, people I'd never met, who looked at me with the kind of polite interest you might give to an old photograph. A few neighbors came out of obligation, but even they stayed close to the charcuterie table, avoiding eye contact. Lana floated around like a hostess on a game show, charming everyone with practiced warmth. When she passed by me, she whispered that I should try to smile more, that today was supposed to be healing, not depressing. She meant it to sound helpful, I think, but it landed like a slap. Ethan checked on me once or twice, always distracted, always quick to disappear when Lana called his name. I sat in a corner by the window, sipping sparkling water and pretending to be part of things. But I wasn't. I was watching a version of my life that had been rewritten without my permission. A birthday party thrown in my name, filled with strangers, hosted by someone who saw my pain as an inconvenience. And the worst part was, I let it happen, because some part of me still hoped they were right about what I needed. When the cake came out, I thought maybe it would finally be over. Maybe we'd light the candles, I'd make a wish I didn't believe in, and we'd all pretend like this party meant something. But then Lana raised her glass and called for silence. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, like honey that hides the sting. She said we were all gathered to support me, to lift me up in my loneliness, and then she turned and looked right at me. She said that grief had made me distant, withdrawn, hard to reach, and that if I didn't let people in, if I didn't adapt to my new reality, then yes, if it were up to her, I would die alone. The room went still. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the clink of a fork falling to a plate, the shallow breath of someone trying not to react. I looked around and realized no one was going to say anything. Ethan stared at his shoes again. One of the neighbors avoided my eyes. Lana sipped her wine like she had just delivered a kind truth, something noble and necessary. And in that moment, something in me hardened. I set down the cake knife without a word. I looked at Lana, not the way I usually did, not with tolerance or the hope that she might mean well. I looked at her the way James used to look at people who crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "You have 10 minutes to leave my house." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just let the words hang there. She laughed, of course. Laughed like I was being dramatic. Like I was a silly old woman who didn't understand how things worked anymore. But I understood perfectly. I understood that the people around me weren't going to defend me. I understood that the woman standing in my kitchen had mistaken my grief for weakness. And I understood that if I didn't take back my place in my own home, no one else was going to do it for me. So I waited. And as the seconds ticked by, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt James. Not just in memory, but in resolve. I wasn't going to be erased. Not today. Not ever. I didn't know he'd be there. When Mr. Roberts stepped through the door in his navy suit and quiet shoes, the room shifted. He looked out of place among the glittering guests and pastel decorations, like someone who had come for business, not a celebration. He walked straight toward me, ignoring the startled looks and forced smiles. In his hands, a leather folder and a small flash drive. He greeted me softly, then said he was here on James's instructions. The words felt too big to hold in the moment. He asked if we could sit. I nodded. The guests tried to return to their conversations, but I could feel them watching, ears tilted in our direction. Lana hovered at the edge of the room, suddenly less composed. Mr. Roberts opened the folder. James had prepared it months before his passing. He told his lawyer to deliver it only if he believed I was being emotionally harmed by someone in the family. The clause was vague, but James had trusted Mr. Roberts to know the difference between grief and cruelty. The folder held photographs, printed screenshots, financial records, a transcript of a conversation Lana had with someone named Brent, time-stamped just 6 weeks after James died. She hadn't just been unkind. She'd been planning. There were text messages. Lana is joking about how easy it would be to move me out. Joking about my memory, my routines, calling me a relic in a house that didn't know it was a museum yet. One photo showed her at dinner with Brent. The same night, she told Ethan she was visiting her aunt. Another showed her pulling cash from Ethan's account, cash meant for home repairs, into a side account under her name. Mr. Roberts connected the flash drive to the television. A recorded message from James filled the room. He looked tired but focused. He spoke directly to me, saying he hoped this day would never come. But if it did, I needed to remember who I was and what I deserved. "You are not weak," he said. "You are not alone." Silence followed. Lana was pale, still gripping her wine glass. A few guests had already backed toward the door, pretending they needed air. Others looked at her like they'd never seen her before. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. James had spoken for me, from beyond the grave. And in that moment, every doubt I'd carried about my own worth, every quiet question about whether I'd overreacted, melted away. Because now, they all knew the truth. And so did I. Lana didn't speak at first. Her lips parted like she wanted to deny it all. But no words came. Her hand shook slightly as she set her wine glass on the side table, leaving a faint print behind like evidence she had ever belonged in that room. Mr. Roberts laid out the legal consequences with a calmness that left no room for argument. Fraud, financial manipulation, emotional coercion. Enough to void her claims to anything James had left behind. Enough to stain her name in every place she thought she held power. She tried to appeal to Ethan, but he looked away. His silence, once a shield, had turned into distance. He wasn't coming to her defense anymore. The line had been crossed, and he finally saw what I'd been too tired to explain. I stood then, not with drama or raised voice, but with clarity. I told Lana she had 2 options: leave quietly, sign the annulment papers I had already prepared, and never contact our family again, or face a very public legal process that would not be kind to her reputation. She looked around and saw nothing but eyes she couldn't charm anymore. Her power had lived in pretense. Now, stripped of illusion, she was just a woman caught lying in a house that had once tolerated her. She signed. Mr. Roberts witnessed it. Ethan stood behind me, silent but firm. There were no hugs, no tears, just the scrape of a pen and the sound of a door finally closing. I turned to the envelope Mr. Roberts had placed beside the folder. Inside was a letter from James, sealed in his familiar handwriting. I opened it slowly, holding the paper like something sacred. Then I read it aloud. He wrote about love and legacy, about how strength sometimes hides in silence, but must rise when truth calls it. He reminded me of our first home, our first fight, the way I laughed when he danced badly in the kitchen. He wrote that he trusted me to protect what mattered, that our love didn't end with him, that I was the heart of this family, even when it felt like it had stopped beating. When I finished, I folded the letter with steady hands. The room was quiet, not with shock this time, but with reverence. They weren't looking at a fragile widow anymore. They were looking at a woman who had taken her story back. And for the first time in a long time, I stood taller. Not just in defense, but in power. 3 months later, the house feels different. Still quiet, but in a peaceful way, like it's finally resting. The echoes are softer now, filled with memories that comfort rather than haunt. Ethan visits every Sunday. Sometimes he brings fresh bagels. Sometimes he just brings himself. We sit on the porch and talk about nothing important, and it's the most important part of my week. He's seeing someone new, Maya, a third-grade teacher with kind eyes and a laugh that fills a room without trying. She has a daughter, Lily, who's 8, and has already claimed the spare bedroom as her weekend kingdom. The first time they came over, Lily ran straight to James's old armchair, curled up, and fell asleep within minutes. I watched her breathing, steady and small, and felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot had been untied without me noticing. Maya didn't ask about the past. She brought a pie and helped me in the kitchen. When I dropped a bowl, she just smiled and picked up the pieces with me. No pity, no performance, just kindness. A few weeks ago, Ethan told me about a foundation James had been working on before he passed. I hadn't known. He called it Second Light, a fund for families recovering from loss, emotional abuse, and sudden upheaval. He wanted to give people a way back to themselves. I've taken over the paperwork. Not out of obligation, but because it feels right. We've helped 3 families already. One of them reminded me of who I was 3 months ago. Tired, unheard, almost invisible. She hugged me after our meeting and said she didn't feel alone anymore. That's when I understood what James had been trying to leave behind. Not just money, not even justice, but connection. A thread between people who feel forgotten, and the quiet proof that they still matter. I still talk to him sometimes, when I water the garden, when I hear Lily's tiny footsteps upstairs, when the light hits the dining room table just right, and I remember the way he used to read the paper, glasses slipping down his nose. Real love doesn't always look like flowers or grand speeches. Sometimes, it looks like someone is standing beside you when the room goes quiet. Sometimes it's a letter left behind, or a child laughing in your hallway. It looks like healing, slow and honest. It looks like peace. It looks like this. And maybe that's the greatest gift he ever gave me. Not just love that lasted, but love that taught me how to begin again.